Hello and welcome to FireDEV. In this episode, we are talking to Brian Schwab. Thank you, Brian, for coming on to the podcast today.
Oh, no, great to be here. Thank you.
So, you work at the Lego Group. Tell us, about what you do there.
I have kind of a weird job. I'm what's known as a innovation mission lead in a part of Lego called the Creative Play Lab, CPL. Um, we're effectively the group that tries to make new types of play for the larger Lego company. And what a mission lead does is instead of working on a particular project, they more do what's called leading a mission, which is could be some large scale effort that Lego wants to get done, and it takes however many projects, however many products in order to get that mission to be complete. I'm trying to oversee a larger scale mission within Lego instead of a particular project.
Okay. Can you give some examples of what that, might mean, in the real world in terms of, Lego?
Yeah, no, for sure. There's several missions that are happening within CPL right now. Some of them are like trying to work with circular economy and the environmental impact of Lego in general. Some of them are more like my personal the mission I'm working on has more to do with interactivity in the core system. Some of the other ones might be around other large efforts that like Lego is doing at the time.
Okay. So, I'm guessing you're a huge Lego fan then?
Decent, yeah. I'm not gonna lie. Like I grew up in a fairly poor part of America. I was raised on a dairy farm, actually, so we didn't have a lot of Lego when I was growing up. But I definitely did get some over time from garage sales and such, and they were a huge part of my childhood because I didn't have a lot of toys growing up, and so like the fact that I could have a toy that could be built over and over and over again in a million different ways, that was super important for me as a kid. So I will, however, say that since I've joined Lego, I've definitely gotten to feel a lot more appreciation for like the all of the craziness that is Lego because of being able to work with all these folks that have worked there for quite some time and know so much more about it than I do. So I've gotten to have all kinds of awesome classes and all kinds of stuff in advanced Lego at this point. It's good.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that's one of the beauties of a toy like Lego is that you can just build it again and again. Partly you can just build it the same thing if you want to. Let's say if you have a few Lego sets, do it one now, then do it again a little bit later on. Or you can just totally change it up, modify it, mix sets as well. Because obviously all the Lego bricks are compatible with each other, going back to the start, I think. So it's not like other toys where if you're not getting the exact same, toy, you're not going to be able to, interact or play with it. Because it's not like a game console where if you have, a PS1 game, you can't just put it into your PS5, and your work. Whereas with Lego, you could have some Lego pieces from the 1990s, when I was born, and I've got a 1 year old daughter now. I've just bought some of the bigger Lego pieces, not the small ones. But I know when she's a bit bigger, I'll get her some of the smaller ones, and I know she'll be able to use some of my pieces if she wanted to. I mean, she'll probably want her own pieces, but like, you'll be able to do that. So yeah, that flexibility for a kid is definitely very powerful.
Oh, 100%. I mean, the we definitely have people either even working at Lego that like they have Lego pieces from their grandparents.
Yeah.
Like it's been in the family for a really long time, and it's really fascinating to see a platform for content and for experimenting that kids have had going on 90 some years at this point of these crazy little bricks that like kids have had in their lives for so long.
Oh yeah, having that heritage. It's something that I mean. I'm trying to think. Is there any toy that's as popular as Lego? You know, can say because, like I said, video games there's a bit of backwards compatibility, but the ease of it is not there. Like, yeah, you can put a PS4 game into a PS5, but you can't put a PS3 one, or PS2 or PS1. But yeah, like you were saying, you could have grandparents that had Lego, and their PCs would fit directly onto your Lego. You'll be all good. And obviously, with the newer Lego sets, there are some newer pieces, newer colors. So I mean, you can mix and match them in a way that you might want to use some of the older stuff with the newer stuff, which you can't do with, like I said, I'd say pretty much any other toy.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, we haven't had um, digital products for very long
No.
in general, right? So like you have games out there like Minecraft, let's say, or something that like are going on a good long period at this point, but like those things didn't exist 80 years ago. And so
Mm,
it's kind of hard to beat a system level toy when there's not a lot of system level toys out there. You know what I mean? And so there are definitely stuff. There's trains and slot car sort of things that kids have potentially had for a really long time. There's
mm,
even kind of like Hot Wheels and kind of like the little ramps and stuff that you can play with Hot Wheels. Those have been sort of like systems that like kids have been able to like use and add to and recombine over time. But like having a very general purpose, kind of like I can take this thing apart and put it back together into a completely different way. That's something that's been kind of Lego's big thing, right, for a long time. I mean, obviously you have very free form stuff like Play-Doh or something like that, but for
mm.
the most part, like Lego has sort of been able to kind of like live in this spot for quite a while with very few kind of like other folks doing the same thing. I mean, there's definitely Mega Blocks and other things at this point that have kind of come along on the construction toy scenario at this point, but for the vast majority of their history, they kind of got to like go for a while by themselves.
Oh yeah. Plus also like Mega Blocks, or I remember Kinects as a kid, or any of these ones. I don't think they have the same level of collaboration that Lego has with other IPs. Obviously, Star Wars is one of their biggest ones, but then they have their architecture range as well, and then they have the cars and all these other different ones. So you get obviously you have Star Wars toys, Star Wars figurines, but then you can get a Lego version of it as well. And then obviously you got the video games, which for the Lego Star Wars games have been very popular. So to have all of that variety, I think is pretty unprecedented in terms of the toy space, or in any space in general.
Yeah, I mean, it's a testament to Lego's ability to kind of like fit any given IP, right? That like, that's how reconfigurable the product is, right? Is that it actually meets the visual standards of the Star Wars license, right?
Yeah,
It still it doesn't completely and 100% look exactly like the movie, but it's close enough that like you know one of the highest visual fidelity IPs on the planet is fine with where they can get to, right? And
yeah.
it's done at a level that people can buy it and they can recognize it and they can play with it and it's fun for them.
I think the other thing with Lego is the pieces have always been, in terms of my recollection, again, I'm not 60 years old, 50 years old with really old PCs. My PC will date back to the 90s, but the quality of the PCs have always been good. Not to say that Lego hasn't necessarily improved stuff over time, but I get a piece, or like that I've had for 20 or 30 years, and maybe if the colors faded, but apart from that, the actual quality of the piece, I don't think I look at it and think, yeah, that's worse or better, even because you know how some toys the quality is worse than it was like 20 years ago. They were a lot more robust. You could probably stand on them, and now they'll just break. You know, if you try and stand on it. So I feel like with Lego, the quality has been high from or for a long time as well, and I think that helps because if they were rubbish 50 years ago, then you're probably not going to want to use them. But because the quality's always been good and consistent,
Yeah.
it stands that test of time as well.
No, for sure. And I mean, and that was definitely, you know, the original founder of the Lego system. That was very much one of his, early sort of system goals, was sort of like that the quality had to be super high. It was one of the things that, like, by switching to plastic, because believe it or not, Lego started out like, the company made most of its toys out of wood, believe it or not. And
Mm.
so they switched over to plastic when they realized that they could, like, make the toys that much sort of like higher quality, almost, because the amount of kind of like consistency that they could get in the product was so high, and they could make it that much cheaper so that people could have these like large sets of reconfigurable blocks. And that was part of the real push towards plastic with the original Lego sort of creation system.
Oh yeah, and they don't deteriorate and break down the way or splinter the way wood does. But obviously, the negative side is they're not as environmentally friendly. Like, how much of a concern is that within Lego, considering the whole thing of Lego is plastic? It's not like a little bit of it where they can say, oh, you know what, we can try and remove this from our packaging with some alternative material to go to some alternative material. It'll be a huge shift. One of the reasons I'm guessing why they haven't done it, like, what's the internal opinion of plastic and of the way the world is right now with trying to go green?
I mean, it's a huge thing. Like I said, like when I was talking about missions, like one of the missions that Lego is actually involved in is circular economy, and kind of like environmental impact, just across the board. And so there's an enormous number of work that's going on inside of Lego to kind of like make better choices for the planet, make better choices so that, like, we can continue to have like our Lego goodness, but like not impact the planet in a negative way. And it, trust me when I tell you, it is like probably like one of the top five most important things that are being worked on at Lego right now.
Okay, that's cool. That's good to hear. So, what are some of your favorite Lego sets?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Um, so it's been cool. I've been working on a number of things recently, and so like one of the things that's cool is, I slowly have been going through and kind of buying up some Lego sets to be able to try some stuff, as well as, seeing the full experience from, like, building it, and like what's the experience of the build instructions, and like how it's paced and all of that, all the way to, okay, now I have it together and I want to like play with it in various ways. Like, is it playable? Is it usable? Can I pick it up? Can I swoosh it around? Can I drive it on the wall? Can I this, that, and the other, and not have it fall apart, or not have it, you know, maybe I want it to fall apart. Maybe, maybe I want it to fall apart, and it's doing it in the right way. I guess the point is like I've been doing a lot of that exploration, and so I can kind of answer that question. Um, I've been playing a little bit with, some of the Star Wars sets that came out that are like micro fighters, because they actually are like, they look a lot like some of the vehicles, but they like are very very playable, right? Like I actually have a very small Millennium Falcon that sits on my desk all the time, that like you can drop on the floor and it's not going to break apart. It's one of the
Yeah, those
stuff.
smaller ones don't compared to, obviously, if you drop the, I think, is it the 75192
Yeah.
Lego Millennium Falcon, that big one? Yeah, that's gonna break.
Oh yeah, yeah, 100%. Right, right. But like I I don't even know if I could pick that one up, right?
Yeah, I
And
mean,
so,
I don't think you would want to try. It's one of those things. I'm in the middle of doing the large Star Destroyer, the 7252. My wife bought it for, I think, was it Valentine's Day
yeah,
2 years ago. I want to say I've just like it's just so big and kind of daunting. I need to get back to it because I do really do want to finish it. I've done some mini sets over, this since then. But yeah, I'm just like once that's done, it's gonna for the most part permanently just be in some place, and I need to figure that place out as well.
for sure. I think like one of the larger sets that I put together recently that was really fun was the haunted house, the big one with the tower that like
Mm.
has the little elevator in the tower. Have you played that one?
I haven't, but I think I know the one you mean.
Yeah, I apologize. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but the reason I like that one is because it is a very large set. It takes quite a while to put together, but the way that they have set up the build is so that like you put together a little bit of the walls and the tower, and then they have you put together like the organ that sits downstairs in one of the rooms, and then you put together a little bit more of the tower, and then you put together a big like mad scientist room with a skeleton in one corner, and so they give you this like really interesting pace between like weird little things to think about for a while, and then like some time to like let the story grow in your head while you're putting together like a chunk of this like really tall tower. And then you get done with that tower and you realize that there's like a mechanism inside that like lets you put a couple of minifigures in a little ride, and they go up to the top and then they fall down really fast, and it's almost like the Tower of Terror at Disneyland, right? It's like a little ride. And it was a fascinating set to me because I actually enjoyed the way in which I put it together and the way that it gave you time to think about how you wanted to play with it once you then got it all the way together, and it like gave your brain a little bit of things to do like while you were doing the more sort of like, okay, I've got another chunk of wall to make, right? It was really really well thought out in that way, and it gave me a lot of respect for the level of craft that like not just the models that goes into the sets, but like the way that they do the instructions and the full experience of like putting together a set. It was pretty. It was one of my first big ones that like I really got that sense of like that deeper mission that a lot of folks have when they build stuff. Um, these bigger sets that they put out.
Oh yeah, it's definitely more of a accomplishment. But a couple of weeks ago, I did the Lego Boba Fett Slave One. I think it's
Oh,
about
nice.
500-600 pieces. I want to say, and
Cool.
they had it for sale on the local supermarket. So for I grabbed that. I was at Star Wars Celebration Europe as well, and me and my wife went. We stayed at Airbnb, and I was building it whilst I was at the Airbnb. It didn't take too long because it was small. And before building that, I was like, I just want to get all the biggest sets, like the big Star Destroyer, the big Millennium Falcon, the architecture ones, all these, like the biggest of the biggest ones. And then after doing this, I'm like, I want the big ones, but it's kind of nice to have one that, because some of the really small ones, it looks a bit chunky and blocky and there's not that much detail to it. But I find like at the 500 to 1,000 piece mark, it's not too much of a time commitment. You can do it in a day
Yeah.
or over a weekend. It's got enough detail that you're like, okay, it actually looks nice, and you can find quite a lot of places to put it as well. So I've kind of got an appreciation for I guess the medium sets that are
Yeah.
probably between $40-$50 to $100, or 40-50 quid to $100.
Yeah. 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 No, it's been one of the things that's been most interesting about working at Lego is like sort of getting this sense of like some of our sets, a lot of people use them for play, like right, like
Mm,
kids take them, they put them together, they now have toys that they can use to like play out scenarios or stories or all whatever the heck they're doing. And sometimes people take those exact same sets and just like put them on a shelf somewhere and they just
mm.
display, and they almost use like building it is this meditative or kind of like hobby thing that they do. and in some cases the same set works for both, but in sometimes like some of the sets are mostly just for display and some of the sets are mostly just for play, right? And finding that out was actually, I mean, looking back on it, I probably should have known that, going in, but like not having worked at Lego for a long time, it didn't really occur to me just how big of a difference that was, right? Like even internally, we have this notion of free building versus using build instructions to do stuff. And so I agree. There's this like sweet spot, and it kind of depends on like where you are in your life and how much room you have, and like are
How
you
much time as well, I guess, in a
yeah,
way.
yeah, right? Because people like to sit down and like they like to like not get up until they finish stuff, right? People
Mm.
some people really like to like do things in chunks, and so like having the right size set, it can be very very satisfying.
Oh yeah, for sure. So with these, sets, obviously I have, instructions. I remember you were saying that some of your earliest memories are getting Lego sets from garage sales. Did they come with instructions out of curiosity, or did they sometimes not? You had to try and figure things out. Actually, when you're a kid, I think you enjoy that a bit more than when you're an adult. To be fair.
Yeah, no, I mean, and to be honest, I think not only was I just sort of like used to parts being missing when I would get toys from garage sales or whatever, like, you would get the game of Monopoly or something and there would be like three cards missing and you would have to figure out what they were and you would draw them on paper yourself and put them in the game, right? And so we kind of got used to that. So like, yeah, when we would get a set, we wouldn't really have instructions to kind of like do it. Sometimes they would come with a box and you could look at the box and like build whatever it was. But a lot of times we were just using them as like building material and like just building whatever the heck we felt like building, right? And so um, a lot of my early Lego memories were more about like more just this notion of free building than about like, oh, I had this really cool set that I built and I could point it at you directly. I,
Oh yeah.
I do have some sets that I have in the past owned and I've rebought now that I'm older. But for the most part, yeah, that's a newer thing, like getting like awesome sets with like 1,000 pieces that I put together in a particular way. By the way, I looked up the haunted house. The haunted house is 10273. Um, it's actually a really cool set because of the sort of like way that it's made. So check it out.
Okay, fair enough. Definitely will check that one out. Yeah, mm, definitely now more than when I was a kid. I do use instructions. I think partly for me, it's when I'm sitting there. I kind of want a consistent experience. Plus, I don't have as much time. It's like nowadays when I do try and play video games, I try and get as much in as I can. Realistically, with having a family, business, and other commitments as well, stuff to do around the house, for example. But I mainly just play single player now. Whereas before, I would play a lot of single player, but I would play a lot of online to the point where I'll be really high in like the world leaderboards in Killzone, for example, something like that. Now it's like I want to sit down and know I'm just gonna have you know a good time, and single player gives me that consistency more than online. Like I could sit there in online and have a 30-minute session, and it could just be a terrible session, and I'm like, I'm not gonna spend another 5 hours to make up for that 30-minute session because I just don't have the time. And obviously, same with the Lego sets. Going through the instructions, I know if I've done these 10 pages, I've got the 10 pages of accomplishment. I know what I'm getting out of it. But I remember as a kid, there will be times I would get a Lego set. I wouldn't even look at the instructions. I'll be like, I can see the pictures, at the front and then at the back of the box from slightly different angles. I'll just go based on the pictures. And, that would be fun in itself. But nowadays, I mean, I might start doing that again when my daughter's a bit older and she gets into Lego. That's one thing I'm really looking forward to with having a kid is I like a lot of kids toys, Lego, video games, that sort of stuff, and being able to not only get it for her but enjoy it with her and it not be a chore. Because I remember seeing with my parents or other parents, they might try and make an effort and play whatever the kid's playing, but you can tell it's, they're making an effort. If they had a choice, they would not be doing it. They would rather be doing something else. But when the time comes and I'm like, oh, we can play Lego, like that would be like an hour of useful time for me. I'll be like, I actually enjoyed that time.
No, for sure. It's so same with me. I have a 9-year old right now, and it's been pretty fascinating because like I said, growing up on a farm, we had a lot of work to do, but like me and my dad didn't really get a lot of time together in a play sense, right? Like we worked together a lot. We did an awful lot of chores together and an awful lot of projects around the farm, but like you know the sum total of time that we probably spent together playing, I could probably count out on a single hand. Like just not a lot of. And it wasn't that he wasn't a playful person, it was just that we didn't have a lot of time to play, right? And so in stark difference, like I've worked in the video game industry, and now I work at Lego my entire life. And so like my 9-year old, he comes to me and says, hey, let's do this. And I'm like, okay, that's great. Let's work on that. And I can sit down with him and honestly enjoy myself and like feel exactly what you're saying. It's been quite a fascinating difference for me because like every once in a while I'll catch myself thinking like, wow, I honestly can't think of a single time where like me and my dad sat on the floor for 2 hours and put together a robot and then destroyed that robot. you know so it's big, it's a big difference.
Yeah, for sure. It's like with our parents, it would be they might start to do the Lego bit, and then they would get bored, or they'd be like, I'm gonna go and do something else. It wouldn't be like so they wouldn't stay for the whole hour, or 2 hours or however long, or I can't wait probably not when she's 2, 3 when she first starts playing it, but when she's a bit older and she can do longer play sessions. Say to her, let's try and get this 2,000 piece one done in like a whole day. Like, cause I think a 2,000 piece one you could practically, do in a day. One of those huge ones that are
Yeah.
like 600 quid, probably not so practical. But one of the like a 2,000 piece one or a 1,000 piece one, you could do that in a day and be like, this is today's goal. This is the only thing we have today, to do today. So yeah, being able to enjoy that, I'm very, appreciative that the things I like, most of them, my daughter or a kid will also like, and as a result, I can enjoy them with them instead of liking things that only adults can, engage in. So I'm very appreciative for that, and I think a lot of other parents should give it a go and be open to that idea of it. Obviously, you don't have to, scrap everything else you do and just play with Lego. I think that'll be obviously be going a bit too far, but be open to enjoying some of those things that you might have enjoyed as a kid. Enjoy it now from an adult's perspective, and have fun with your kids as well.
I mean, and to that point, like one of the things that's pretty interesting to me is a lot of kids products have been started to get made such that like adults can enjoy them as well, right? Like the difference between like an early Disney movie that was largely just made for kids and like one that's Frozen or something where there's like some humor and there's some stuff that goes on there that's very much more sort of aimed at adults. The interesting thing about that is that now the parents and the kids can kind of like watch things together and both feel a lot more kind of connected and a lot more sort of engaged. And so like one of the things that even I've been working on while I'm at Lego is working on products that are maybe super fun for mixed groups of people to kind of like build together or to play with together, right? So it's not just a toy for a kid or something really challenging and kind of like meditative for an adult, but it's sort of like something in the middle where like maybe the adult gets a little bit of what they want and the kid gets a little bit of what they want, and it makes it easier for the two of them to play together and to engage as a family or as a group of people or whatever. But they get to kind of like both get something out of it, and so that there's not quite so much of this like, well, you either have to be a really tolerant parent or not.
Oh yeah, for sure. So, what technologies does Lego use to aid their processors? Because obviously, especially a unique company as Lego, the size of Lego, like what are some of the technologies they use, especially in the newer ones? Because we've had a lot of technology advancements over the last 10 years in general.
If you're just talking about Lego across the board, one thing that I think that they use a lot of is testing with real human beings, right? Like Lego's been one of the companies that uses the most sort of real kid testing of like almost any group of any company I've ever worked for, right? It's just they really, really believe in the power of like putting stuff in front of real kids and getting insights from the kids directly. And so there's an enormous amount of that particular technology that they use. And because of that sort of edict, right, of like getting insights from the kids directly, the amount of tech that we are slowly using more and more of. So like let's say that uh, 20 years ago, you may like join a data like a play test or something at Lego where you sign a paper, you come in with your kids, they play with some sets that we show them for 35 minutes or whatever it is. Maybe they even get a present on their way out the door. But the point is that like you came into Lego and you played with a set, and then your parents and maybe even the kids talked with some of the people and got insights, and we got to watch them play and that kind of thing. But it's all just sort of like come in and play on the floor in a room, right? Nowadays, we can actually do quite a bit more when you come in. We can like, uh, you know, point a camera at the whole thing and do a little bit of data analysis on it afterwards, and get all sorts of deeper insights into like how kids play and how they play with particular objects and how they play in particular patterns as far as sort of various themes or styles of play, or how do they play with each other, like kids, two kids together, or a kid and an adult. All of these sorts of relationships we can like study more with a little bit more data analysis because of the way that technology has improved the way that we can do playtesting with the general adult, with the general audience, right? We don't just have to like sit and watch you. We can like get all kinds of data from it now. Uh, um, so it's been really nice to sort of like have a global company like Lego that can like really start to double down on all of their previous efforts, but now they can get so much deeper insights and so much better understanding, and we can actually push as a species, we can push how well we understand how kids develop and how kids play in much, much richer detail.
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely the technology allows you to do, stuff that you wouldn't be able to do, testing as well. So previously, you worked at Magic Leap for almost 6 years.
Yep.
What did you do there? Your time at Magic Leap?
Magic Leap was an interesting company. I joined there, and they basically had just hired me as like a very senior game developer, right? Because they had a studios division that they were starting up as well. But Magic Leap was uh, an XR company, a spatial computing company that was building a set of a headset to be able to like basically put pixels wherever they wanted when you looked around, right? It could sense the world, it could sense your hands, it could sense it could sense where you were looking, and then it also had some visual text so that we could put pixels into the real world, right? Like I could actually have like a little T-Rex that like walked across the table in front of me, and I could watch it do it. It could jump off the table. It could land on the floor. And so at Magic Leap they hired me on as a game dev, but very quickly I realized that their iteration time on the entire tech stack, and especially the experiential, was very, very high, right? Like it took quite a while to get features to get make it down to where anybody would try and make a demo with it, and then getting feedback from that took quite a while. So I basically started a group there called the Interaction Lab. The Interaction Lab was, for all intents and purposes, like the sort of like concept prototyping group for the entire company. We would do first turn on of various features, including hardware or software features. We would do a lot of experience, kind of like demonstrations to see like how do we use these features or not use them because they don't work very well, or they need additional data in order to be successful, or needs to run faster or needs less latency. A lot of that kind of demo experiential testing. We also worked with a lot of external partners to sort of like teach people how to make spatial computing kind of like uh, um, applications or ways to use this new type of compute environment. And then also like did a lot of working with like internal groups like the software development kit group or the the primary hardware group, giving them tests for the assembly line, all sorts of craziness, right? And so at our peak, we were about 30 people. We probably made several hundred prototypes over the 6 year period. But overall, it was a great project, great team that we managed to build there. I actually really really enjoyed my time at Magic Leap, believe it or not. We not only got to ship the first Magic Leap device, but like the second Magic Leap device was mostly built by the time I left, and so seeing that all come out, the second device come out was fun to sort of like see that that's still happening. I still have some friends that work there. The pandemic kind of like made Magic Leap do a fairly large pivot as far as sort of like the full scope of what they were trying to do. And so right now they're mostly focused on a few enterprise clients, and they laid off quite a number of folks, but they're still going strong. Like to this day, like I said, they somewhat recently released their second product, and things are still going well.
Okay, yeah. So, because a few years back, Magic Leap was, I remember, everywhere in the tech news. I remember following it a lot. I remember there was loads of videos coming out, and it was very exciting. The possibilities of what it could provide just seem endless. Like, you just don't hear about it that much anymore. Like, what happened and like what's currently happening at Magic Leap? Because I remember thinking, can't wait to get hold of this headset, what it can do. And then obviously I know it came out. The reception of it wasn't, as good as I think they would have wanted. And obviously the price point, etc. Like, what do you think happened with Magic Leap?
Um, I mean, to be honest, the biggest thing that happened with Magic Leap is that it's 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 not really time yet for consumers to fully go there. Like right now, everybody has a smartphone. I mean, the vast majority of people have a smartphone in their pocket that already gives them an insane amount of compute sort of superpowers. They can run the vast majority of the applications that they need to run in order to make their life that much better on that phone that's in their back pocket. It's already linked up to the phone network so that like they can get it wherever they need to be. They don't have to worry about extra hardware. They don't have to worry about other things. Spatial computing is interesting because it's not just mobile computing, right? Like a smartphone is just a mobile computer. It's a computer that's been shrank down and it has an interface such that like you can use your laptop except it fits in your back pocket, right? It's mobile. But spatial computing, a wearable computer, is just that one step more integrated with the person, right?
Mm.
It really is something that like both of my hands are free. I could potentially be doing all of the things that I normally do as a person, but still have access to my compute. Whereas with a phone, I have to kind of stop what I'm doing. I have to like pull my phone out. It has to take up one or both of my hands, and I have to stare at this tiny little square that's in my hand, right? I can't fully talk to you. I can't fully do my job because I'm looking at my phone. And so spatial computing or wearable, sort of integrated computing is it's where we're going to get eventually. It's just it's not quite ready for full blown consumer usage just yet because the form factor isn't quite where people want it. It's not fully integrated into like an app sort of library that like everybody knows they can do whatever they need to do with the applications as they currently sit. It's kind of like where the smartphone market was 10 or 15 years ago, where some people had smartphones but not too many, right? Because like you could only really do the five or six applications that were running on an iOS phone at that moment, right? um, you got to remember the first couple years of the iPhone, there wasn't even an app store. You were basically stuck with the apps that were on your phone when it first came out. And
Mm,
so, they just, it wasn't quite, it's not quite time yet for a full consumer launch. And to be honest, we argued back and forth with the leadership at Magic Leap about like if that was the case or not. And they decided to sort of make that larger push for a full consumer launch in the level in which they made it. In reality, I think that like for right now, it actually is quite successful in the enterprise market, right? There's a good chunk of clients that we had while I was at Magic Leap, and they have even more clients now that are doing really good business, believe it or not, with enterprise clients. Like in the medical industry, it's actually doing some really good work. In some like manufacturing, there's actually an enormous number of like uh, manufacturing groups that use spatial computing to kind of like be able to have all sorts of really good compute applications, but they still have their hands free to like do complex mechanical work or whatever it is that they need to do. All of that stuff is actually being used right now. And so it's not that they went anywhere, it's more that there was sort of like a refocusing on the particular customer base that it made the most sense to be going after right now. Because to your point, the price point isn't quite there for consumer. The the form factor isn't quite there for a consumer. But I got to tell you, like it's just coming. It's not even that it's not that it failed. It's more that it was sort of like a little bit too forward thinking for the time, right? It's kind of like General Magic made what basically could be said to be the progenitor of the smartphone about 12 years before the smartphone came out. And like, did the company fail? I mean, yes, they didn't make any money, but what they did was they like launched the careers of the vast majority of people that went to Apple and built the iPhone, as well as like four other places, right? And so, um, a lot of the learning that they discovered at General Magic ended up being turned into a full blown consumer device down the road once the tech got a little faster and the battery lives lived a little longer, and right. But all of that work was done much earlier. And that's kind of what, if you want to say, happened at Magic Leap. I would say that we found out an enormous amount of human centric spatial computing knowledge. We pioneered a lot of crazy goodness when it came to um, especially multimodal interactions with eyes and hands and head pose all fused together, doing a bunch of human factors testing around wearable compute and the ways in which it needed to be calibrated to a human in order to be the best possible sort of like inputs and best possible human understanding around those inputs. But like, it's tough. It's tough, especially like, let's say you're Apple. It's tough to like put out a headset when you're very specifically putting something on people's faces, and you don't get to just make the best piece of tech. It actually has to be pretty fashionable, right? Because like if I if I pull out my phone and I just have some weird phone case on, the average person in the room goes, wow, Brian has like weird taste in art or something, right? Like his phone case is pretty wacky. But if I take some crazy set of glasses on and put it on my head, you're gonna think you're gonna actually be like affected by like me personally because it's on my face, right? It's part of
Hmm.
my identity. And so it's a very hard problem to make super high tech that's also highly fashionable. And so that all by itself is a pretty big barrier to entry when it comes to wearable compute for the end consumer, right? Because you don't just need to make one pair of glasses that are fashionable. You need to make all the types of different ways that people might want to have their personal expression of fashion, right? It's tough.
Oh yeah,
But
for sure.
but like I said, Magic Leap is still actually going strong right now. Like they have a number of clients. They put out another product. They're continuing to go forward. I have no doubt that and I don't know if it's going to be Magic Leap or Apple or whom, but I got to tell you, like 10 years from now, if we have another follow up on this podcast, I bet you anything that you probably have some form of wearable ubiquitous computer in your life. You know what I mean? Like mark my words.
Oh yeah, I mean, I hope it comes to fruition. It's just obviously the tech just hasn't quite got there. When do you think a mainstream release for Magic Leap will come? And talking about mainstream releases, were there ever any decent gaming demos that were developed internally or in collaboration with gaming companies? Because something like this definitely lends well to video games.
Oh no, I mean if you ever get a chance, I mean you're here in London. I tell you what, if you ever want to like meet up, I will bring my Magic Leap device and I can show you 4 or 5 pretty dang decent video game scenarios that like work really really well on the device, even the original Magic Leap one, right? And so it's something that like we developed. Um, we had a couple of fairly large games made, and then we definitely made a bunch of different smaller stuff in addition to all of the other applications that we built on there. I guess the point is more, it's not that the tech isn't where it needed to be, it's that it isn't quite ready for a mainstream consumer launch because of other factors, like I said, like fashion and those sorts of issues, right? Like we're not quite mainstream as far as sort of like, does this device fit into the way in which people think of computing even right now, right? They've got the vast majority of the functionality that they think of as their computing needs just in their phone or in a laptop. But once we really started to peel back the layers of like, what if we don't need to do this particular application in the way that it used to be, because now I have a device that lets me display things in a vastly different way, and it lets me control things with my hand and by looking at stuff. And in you know we had demos that like let you use your coffee cup as a controller, like while you were drinking your coffee you could like you know use your coffee cup as a controller in the application that you were running. It was actually pretty fascinating to see once you started to really, really embrace that notion of like the computer as being fully integrated with your environment. um, it really, really changed a lot of not just how things were built, but like how the ways in which you could interface with the particular application and all of that. So I'm not too worried about if it's going to happen. I think the when, I would say that within 5 to 10 years you're going to start to see it sort of ramp back up, because it involves the displays getting small enough that like they're not just they're not just small that they look good, but that they can be personalized and they can be fashionable, and they're comfortable for most of the day wear, right? In exactly the way that right now the average person with their smartphone is probably on them for 4 or 5 hours on any given day, right? Like that's a common usage for most people that like are heavy sort of smartphone users. And so you can't just make a device that has a really good uh, kind of like experience for a short period of time. The thing with a ubiquitous computer like that is that it kind of needs to be something that you're going to stick with for like a large chunk of your day. And that's part of the reason why it's so much more difficult to get that to a comfort level for an end consumer.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I hope I hope it's sooner rather than later. I'm definitely going to take you up on that offer of next time next time I'm in London. I got some time because I have not tried a Magic
Yeah,
Leap yet, so I'm very interested in seeing what it's like. I've tried multiple VR headsets, over the years, and currently, like, I've got a Quest Pro, Quest 1, 2, PSVR 1, 2. So, like, in terms of VR and Valve Index as well. So, in terms of VR, I've tried low end, all the way to high end, and I have overall enjoyed my VR experience. So I'm interested to see what the Magic Leap is like, considering all the videos I remember seeing a few years back, and I remember thinking, if it looks anything like this when I've got the headset on, I can't wait. So yeah, that would definitely be good. You've done a variety of gaming jobs over your career. What specifically interests you about these worlds? Because even Magic Leap has like a video game like feel to it.
well, I mean, I think part of the reason it had a video game feel to it is just simply because the only environment where people did a lot of 3D object manipulation or sort of like just dealing with that kind of stuff was in the video game world. We very specifically weren't trying to make like a gaming platform. It was more like a computing platform that just happened to be very, very natively speaking 3D, right? And up until up until recently, like a lot of jobs haven't been 3D. You don't have a lot of a lot of heavy 3D intensive data and media being used by the public until somewhat recently. Like, and so there was a little bit of gaming feel to Magic Leap, but it was not so much because we were making video games as we were like doing a lot of 3D. Um, I think one of the reasons that I like one of the reasons I went to Magic Leap from video games, because to your point, I did work in a lot of games before. I was in the game industry for probably 20, I don't know, 25 years or something like that. Um, I went to Magic Leap because the video game world had kind of gotten a little bit stale. We've gotten really, really good at making screen-based interactive stuff, right? Like we're on like version what 17 or 18 of Call of Duty, and we're on version 33 of Madden Football, and we're on whatever, right? There's a number of game genres and game types that are in that have been out for a really long time, and there's a lot of stuff out there that like feels like I've played it 50 times before, and as a game developer, there's a lot of stuff that feels like you've developed it 50 times before. You know what I mean? Like it's I'm not saying it's a boring job, and I'm not saying that it's even kind of like completely solved or anything like that. Obviously, like movies have been around for 100 years, and people still like making movies after they've made 20 of them, because in exactly the same way that every video game is different, every movie is different, right? But for the most part, you can get to a place where if you really want to push interactivity, it can feel a little bit like more of the same in some cases, right? Because we've really gotten into a nice place where like the PlayStation and the Xbox and the Switch, they all have semi-similar controls so that like I can kind of move around and get really good control, and no matter what console I'm on. The graphics are actually pretty, I won't say exact, but like they're at a level that like it doesn't feel like I'm on a completely different planet when I'm like in a PlayStation from an Xbox. You know what I mean? Obviously, there's a little bit lower fidelity when I'm on a Switch, but suddenly I'm in a console that I can walk around with and go wherever I want, right? So the, a lot of video game tech and experiences have gotten into this place where It's very incremental change. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening in the indie scene, but at that point, what that means is that you've got to like come up with the money to pay your rent for a few years and just sort of like hack out together whatever it is that you want to try and hack out. Because if you want to work at a big game company, it's probably not going to be some cool experimental new thing, right? It's going to be some giant thing that's based off of stuff that the company that's spending $200 million knows is going to sell because it's slight variant on something they have already sold. And so I went to Magic Leap because, um, like my last game, I was actually the AI and gameplay programmer for Hearthstone at Blizzard, and that was, believe it or not, somewhat of an experiment at Blizzard. We tried to make a Blizzard quality product with only like 11 people. The original um, Hearthstone team was only 5 programmers and 2 designers and a couple of artists and a sound guy. You see what I'm getting at? It's a really, really small group. And it was this cool experiment to see if we could make something that was Blizzard quality with this tiny team in a small period of time. And we did it. But like, as soon as it was a hit, it was going to go right back to the Blizzard way, right? Like I think within a year of Hearthstone coming out, it was a 90-person team that was cranking out all of the little bells and whistle kind of like Blizzard style features and a bunch of content and all of that, right? It was no longer the tiny experimental goodness. It was more of the giant corporate powerhouse, right? And so I went to Magic Leap to kind of like go back to like something new, something crazy, something innovative. It's probably also the reason why I went to Lego. And so I've always been that kind of person that's kind of like looking for a bigger kind of like connection to my audience. And the only way you can do that is by like understanding them at a richer level, right? And like by coming to them and figuring out what it is that audience what really likes, and being able to find cool ways to deliver on that, and new ways to deliver on that. So that's the big reason why I'm into Magic Leap. But I gotta say, like over the years, like working at various game companies was always super fascinating and fun because every game company has its own little formula on like how to reach out to its audience, and it has its own little kind of like strengths and weaknesses. And I worked at a lot of different game companies. I think Blizzard was like my ninth or 10th game company I worked at. I worked at everything from really, really tiny, uh, you know, garage style video game companies where we worked on a Japanese role playing game for a while and all kinds of craziness, to like I said, giant corporate companies. And over the years, I got to work on an arcade game and a location based ride and several different genres of PC title and several different genres of console games and all kinds of stuff. And so I got to always learn a lot and kind of like find a lot of different ways of connecting with audiences and finding a lot of different worlds, to your point, right? Like one of the more fascinating companies I worked at over the years was I worked on um, one of the very early Medal of Honor games. I was at DreamWorks when it was still DreamWorks Interactive, right? They eventually got bought by Electronic Arts and became EA LA, right? They still did a bunch of Medal of Honor games after that point, but they were run by EA after I left. But that was fascinating because Steven Spielberg would still come into the office. That was back when Spielberg was still part owner of DreamWorks Interactive. And I got to work a lot with, this super hardcore movie guy who was trying to learn the difference between how do I make a movie and how do I engage with my audience in this like slightly more kind of like presentation style of a movie than the much more interactive style of a video game. He would come into my office because I was doing a lot of the gameplay addition to this particular game that I was working on, and he would go, oh, this weapon feels really good, but it would be really cool if the camera was down at this level so that you could like sort of see a little bit more like the protagonist does. Sorry, I had to take a drink.
It's no
Um,
problem.
and I would go, okay. And, because I was an engineer, I could just sort of like quickly change the camera so that it was exactly what he was asking for. And then I would give him the controller and he would start playing. And he'd be like, yeah, see how that feels? And I'd reach over and I would push the joystick to the left or something. And suddenly the camera didn't make any sense anymore, right? As you tried to run to the side, it didn't make any sense anymore. And he would go, oh, you're right. It really only works if you sit still and you're trying to like focus on that thing in the background and. And I'd be like, yeah, we have to kind of like put the camera into a place where it's going to be more responsive for interactivity and where it's going to like make the most sense for larger game scenarios. But slowly over time, I could go, but I see what you mean. You kind of want to like have more eye line with the character because then you connect with the character more. And so we were able to incorporate some of his movie learnings into the video game development. But at the same time, he got to learn a heck of a lot more about like giving up a little bit of control to the audience and having that deeper kind of like connection with the audience by like giving them some of the control over the scene and over the action. It was really fascinating. So, um, you know, I did learn a lot over the years in video games, and I have a lot of respect for the craft in general. It just for me, like I started to feel a little bit like I wasn't learning as much as I wanted, and I wasn't quite growing as much anymore. And so that's more why I went to Magic Leap, right?
Okay. So was Steven Spielberg a big gamer? Like what was his motivations for, trying to do some video games? Because obviously he was a very successful movie director and producer. So like you generally don't get that transition, especially not on a level that Steven Spielberg did, where he was, a lot more involved. Because it's not like one of his IPs, had a video game made of, for it, as there has been Star Wars, that's been made, had loads of games for it, and Alien and vice versa, etc., etc. But to have Steven Spielberg have that much involvement, like I'm guessing he must have been a pretty big gamer or not.
Yeah, he was always. I think the funny thing is like Steve Spielberg made a heck of a lot of things for kids, right? Like E.T. and a lot of his early movies were very sort of like kids' world, from a kid's eye, and they felt very kind of like he. I won't say that he like was a kid, but he like really understood a lot of like kids in general and like so their unique set of problems, if you will, right? And so not only that, but he has a couple of kids himself, right? And so they had originally started DreamWorks because they did have some properties they wanted to like DreamWorks the movie company had some properties that they wanted to like make into video games. Even the Medal of Honor series basically started out as like almost like the game version of like Saving Private Ryan.
Mm.
If you play the very first PlayStation on the original PlayStation, the very first Medal of Honor on the first PlayStation, you for all intents and purposes have the scene where they like come up on the beach and like all hell is breaking loose. That's actually in the first Medal of Honor game almost directly, right? It's pretty crazy and it's pretty amazing how much we were able to accomplish on that early PlayStation system. The the second Medal of Honor game, the one that I worked on, was called Medal of Honor Underground, was based on the French Resistance, believe it or not. And the main character was this French lady that was like trying to like collect spy information and sell it to the Allies and like basically like the Underground Railroad and all kinds of stuff. So he was a big gamer because he liked kids in general and like kids stories. He also, like I said, had kids, but he also really liked connecting with his audience. He was always big on you know, how do I make it so that the characters in my movies um, connect more deeply with the audience? It's one of the reasons why he was so into like eye lines and like controlling the camera, because he always found that that was one of the ways that he could connect with his audience better and make them more empathetic to the main characters. And so getting into the interactive space, I think for him made a lot of sense because he was always looking for that way to get deeper connections with his audience. He had done some other um, he over the years had done some other sort of stabs at doing video game work as well, and so he was always that guy. In fact, he ended up doing some work with us at Magic Leap years later, and so I got to reunite with him a bit after however many 15, 16 years of not working together. Um, we did a couple of things while I was at Magic Leap as well.
Okay,
So
that's cool.
he was always that kind of guy of looking for that. I don't think it was that common because it was very difficult for hardcore movie folks that are used to having total control to kind of like give up that little bit of control so that the audience was more part of the creation process that video games are, right? It's one of the things that makes interactive work so special.
Oh yeah, for sure. So, what games have you worked on? Give us the full breakdown and your involvement in each. Because you mentioned Medal of Honor Underground, you mentioned Hearthstone. What other games have you worked on at or over your gaming career?
Yeah, I've done quite a few. So if I mess up, I apologize. See if I can remember all of them. The very first game I worked on was on the Sega Genesis. Believe it or not, it was a Japanese role playing game called Lufia 2, and it was a very hardcore Japanese role playing game, kind of like in the style of like Chrono Trigger or something like that. And so that was a super fun game. It was I was an engineer. It was actually a port from the Super Nintendo to the Sega Genesis, which made it a fairly heavy tech project because those two machines were very very different, and so it was sort of like reimagining the game so that it would actually run on the Genesis, right? Because like the Super Nintendo had um, way better graphics processor than the Genesis did. It could do music way better and sound effects. All kinds of craziness was going on there. So um, the second thing I worked on was I worked, believe it or not, on a very early uh, uh, game for Hasbro based on the children's what's it called, board game Candyland. And I worked on the PC version of that back in the day. It was like literally, I think it shipped in like 1995 or something, and it was a board game based on Candyland. And so we did it was a game for little kids. It was like tested with like these very very young children. It was actually a pretty funny kind of test environment. We would essentially sometimes get back bugs that said that like kids found a particular character in the game, kind of like their voice was scary or something, and so we had to like lower the volume so that kids didn't like get jumpy. It was really funny to have like bugs for your program that like said, kids are afraid of this, and so that was interesting. I worked well at that same company. I worked on a comic book game that didn't come out based on Rob Liefeld's Image comics called Youngblood. That was interesting in that it was a big IP license, and I was working on a few different titles. It didn't actually end up coming out because the company had some financial issues and whatever. I worked at, let's see, what's the next big game that I made that came out? I would say that would be I worked at a company called The Collective, and we did Buffy the Vampire Slayer for um, Xbox and PlayStation 2, I think it was. I think. Um, so that was the game based on the television show, right? So we actually had to get art that was approved by Fox, and we did all of that. We had all the voices. I don't think Sarah Michelle Gellar came for the voices, but we did do all the other ones, including. Anyways, that game was pretty good. The one of the main designers on that game was somebody who had worked on the Street Fighter series. Uh, um, and so I was able to, I was again the gameplay and AI person on a large portion of that project. And so I was able to kind of like reverse engineer the fighting engine from Street Fighter. And so Buffy had like a full fighting game engine in it. It could be scripted in exactly the same way that the Street Fighter series was. And so that game was really, really fascinating because I had never worked on that like a very hardcore fighting game before, and like learning all the internal workings of how those engines worked was really, really fascinating, and like how deeply the tuning happened on some of those scripts for all those little moves and like all those little branching combos that they could do and all that kind of stuff. And Buffy could do all that stuff. It was actually pretty fascinating by the time we were done. Like, um, I kind of wish that I had stayed at that company for longer because I think we could have done some really cool games with that engine once it was done. Um, uh, for a while, I actually worked at Sony down in San Diego, and they had a studio that was doing sports games, and so like I actually helped build their basketball game for a number of years. I think I was there for 8 years or something. And so I worked on a number of iterations of their basketball game. And the great thing about that was because basketball comes out every year, you get to like slowly improve the product year after year after year, right? So instead of a game like I put it out after 2 years and then I have to start over and make a new game and then I start over and make a new game, that was interesting because like you could take last year's game and just add to it and then add to it and then add to it. And so slowly over time you got to make this like much cooler game over years and years and years. And I was actually able to really, really innovate there and make an AI system for that game that was pretty advanced. Uh, we actually, by the time I left, so like when I first started there, I was the AI programmer, and I was doing all of the AI work for the game. And by the time I left, I had a team of I think eight or nine designers that were the designers were mostly entering in all of the information for the AI. It was largely data driven, and I probably had somewhere on the order of like two 300 times the amount of like AI logic that was going on in that game than when I first started on it, right? Just simply because the system was so much more highly scaled and it was like so easy for a team of designers to continue to add new features and depth to the AI of that game than when I had first started and was doing it all myself. And so that was a super fun project to be on for so long because I got to like really, really change the entire way that like we made games there for over the course of the time that I was working there.
Okay, I mean, definitely a lot of games that you worked on, a lot of interesting titles. So, with all that experience, what would you recommend to people that want to get into the gaming industry? That includes the VR and AR space, and on top of that, what do gaming companies look for? Most in a hire, especially a programmer as well.
No, for sure. Um, it's actually it's actually a really cool time in video game sort of like history, if you will. Just simply because like when I first started, like the first game that I developed, like I said, that Japanese role playing game on the Sega Genesis, I I I programmed that entire thing in 68 Motorola 68,000 assembler code, right? That was dangerously close to machine code, and like you pretty much had to know like most humans couldn't read that code and really know what the hell was going on at all. Whereas nowadays, I could sit down with my 9-year old and Unity, and he can probably make a version of Pac-Man without really doing much coding at all, let's say. And like it might only take a couple of days. You know what I mean? For like with modern game tools, you can really get in there and start to like learn what it is to make a game, what it is to like uh, make particular play scenarios. And so like especially from a programmer standpoint, the tools now are so powerful that like you really can do a hell of a lot of heavy lifting on your own and kind of like make some really really good projects that like if you're going to try and get a job as a programmer and you walk in the door and you say, hey, you may have seen my, you know, either little indie project that I put on the App Store, or it's on Steam, or even just, here's a link or even an executable of something that I built in Unity, and you can show me directly how you can build gameplay logic, how you can potentially build particular systems that interest you. You can show me pretty deep knowledge of like how this stuff works, and then you can even like send me the source code and I can look at it and we can talk about it together, and I can even see that you're not full of crap and that you can actually program, right? And so we're in a place in the video game world where like yes, there's a lot more competition for jobs, but it's actually easier than it's ever been to not only learn the skills necessary to become a game dev, but to show a company that you know what you're talking about, right? And so it's what I would give as advice. And like I said, over the years, I have probably hired hundreds of people and I've probably interviewed thousands of people over the years. And I have given this advice thousands of times. If you come to me with a demo and you can show me something that runs, show me something that works, and you can explain it to me when I pop it open and point to things, that will sell you to me so much faster and easier than if you say, oh, I went to this school, I took these classes, here's a couple of projects that I worked on while I was in college. Because it's so difficult for people to like sort of say, well, what did you exactly do on this project versus this project? How much of this was your teammates in school? How much of this did you, just you did a tiny little bit of it as an intern at this company, but it's not really you. All of that stuff comes into play. But if you come in and you say, hey, I made this, you can play it right now, we can step through it, that makes it so easy for folks, right? And so the fact that Unity is basically free, for an individual to sort of play with forever, right, makes it so easy for that kind of thing to happen at this point.
Oh yeah, like the tools that are available, the resources on YouTube, for example, and obviously the paid resources. Some of them are decent, but like, just the free resource, and that's the thing that I always, being a programmer myself, that I say to people, create a portfolio that will speak, more than a university degree will. Yes, a degree might get you noticed initially, but beyond that, once you're through the door of talking to them, if you can show them that you have some sort of portfolio, that you've been working on stuff, and even if you don't have obviously that, there's always that thing like, how do I get a job if I don't have experience? So the there's this thing that experience is only when you worked at a proper company, but the reality is you could have 5 years of C++ Unreal experience because maybe you did that on personal projects, you documented it maybe on YouTube, blog, whatever it is, and maybe you were doing some web development or something else at the, as your main job. You still have 5 years of experience. You just need to be willing to say, I've got 5 years. This is how my experience is. Yes, you'll get a lot of companies that'll be like, "Nah, we don't want that," but you will get some that'll say, "Okay, that's interesting. You you took your own initiative. You did that. We actually like that." So definitely try and create your own portfolio, understand it, and know how to explain it as well. And going off what you was talking about, universities, I've got a few questions around that as well. So it's like a three parter. Did you go to university? If so, what did you study? how important do you think going to university is for somebody, looking to build a successful career? We kind of got a hint at, your answer previously. And in your opinion, how do you think people can get the most out of their time at university?
Yeah. So I personally did go to school. I was originally I went to an engineering school in Colorado in the United States called the Colorado School of Mines. Believe it or not, Mines. The reason I say that is because a lot of people think I say mind with a D. Um,
Yeah, I
it,
used to think that when I used to hear it online, because especially when people say quite fast, I'm like, "Oh, that sounds cool, Colorado School of Mines." And then I would say, I'll be like, "Oh, it's mines." But yeah, I've heard of the school, but yeah, I used to think
yeah,
the same thing.
it's an engineering school, and the reason it's called Mines is because it was originally started as a mining engineering school, right? Like for people that like are digging mining, right? But and it still is one of the foremost schools of mining and petroleum engineering. But at this point, it's now transitioned to everyone there is an engineer of some flavor, right? And so um, I went to that school as an engineer. I started out as an electrical engineer because I wanted to get into robotics. Um, I switched over when I was about 3/4 of the way through to computer science, and so I sort of like double majored. I switched from being, you know, electrical engineering with a computer science minor, and I just sort of switched, right? Computer science major. And so uh, I studied computer science, artificial intelligence, and electrical engineering in school. Um, but to be honest, I think I mostly learned on the job, as it were. The one thing I will say that I did learn in school was uh, how to code assembly language in many different flavors, and how to code data structures in many different flavors, and how to work with people, right? Because the vast majority of my time growing up, when I did get a hold of a computer, it was just by myself in a dark closet somewhere. And so working with people was definitely part of the university experience that helped a lot going into the game industry. But nowadays, like I think that going to school can still be useful, can still be important if you focus. But honestly, like especially for the game industry, um, I think that you could probably do a lot of online learning. And I know this is probably completely heretical for me to say, but I'm really honestly truthful when I say this. Like if you came to me and had an online degree and some really good demos, I'm just as likely to hire you as if you came from a school. You know what I mean? And in fact, unless you came from that school and also have some good demos and some good experience that you've worked on, I don't know that I would preferentially treat the person who came out of school at all. Um, I have worked with so many people in the game industry that uh, you know went to a school and yet still can't really uh, uh, not just debug or do computer science in the way that you would expect, but like they really didn't get the amount of time needed to like learn as much as they could about video game development. Like even if they went to a video game school, right? Like there's definitely schools recently that have gotten better and better video game programs that like let you focus really heavily on specific areas of game development and get a lot more experience in that way. But those are pretty expensive schools for the most part, and they're so specialized that like if you don't end up getting a video game job, I have a hard time like telling people to go for that, right? Because if you went to a pure video game program at a school and then you try to get a normal computer science degree, or excuse me, normal computer science job somewhere, it might actually be harder than if you went to a more generic college and like got a regular computer science degree. And so I don't know, it's tough for me to say. I think that if I was to, my kid, if he was to come to me and say, "Hey, Dad, I turned 14. I want to start thinking about university. I think I want to go into video games." I would encourage him early to like work on some projects, really see if he liked that style of work, really like try out a number of different things. But then I would probably sort of say, as far as in the university is concerned, let's do some early stuff online and see how you feel about it. Let's get you some education in the way that like might be applicable faster so that you can really get a taste for the thing that you want to go into, because a lot of a lot of the university effort, especially in America, is really expensive, and it can really be about just stuff that is a little bit sideways of what you really need in terms of a career or in terms of like the video game world,
Or
right?
out of date as well. That's what I found when I did a gaming degree.
Yeah, exactly. It can be it's tough for these programs to like buy all the hardware and stuff that they need in order to get like a real gaming program, and then find out that 3 years later all the computers that they bought are outdated and they need to be refreshed, and they need to have new hardware so that they can run the newest version of Unreal so that they can teach that better, and all that it implies, right? Like it's a really fast moving industry, and so it's tough for those types of programs to really be on the cutting edge, if it were.
Oh yeah, for sure. So obviously you talked about, alternative ways of learning. What are the best resources in your opinion for learning to code?
For learning to code. So it kind of depends on you. I mean, and I hate that answer, right? It's a tough answer, but let's say that you're the kind of person that really can read through somebody else's code and like learn a lot. I definitely would suggest like grabbing old games off of the internet that like have been released, like full-fledged high production type games that have been released into the wild as far as sort of open source. um, id tends to like open source all of their old games, and there's still a ton of code in there that's still completely applicable even to modern gaming. And it'll teach you a lot of the like low level stuff that you're not going to learn if you just do Unity development. So like if you ever need to like do low level debugging of some sort of memory problem and you've only done Unity work in your life, it's going to be tough for you to find that kind of stuff, right? Whereas if you like study some of these older game engines, you're going to be able to like maybe develop a little bit of understanding as to like how memory management really works in a larger scale, especially because some of those old games are pretty well documented and they've gotten communities sprouted up around them that like have even further documented the code, right? So you can find Quake 2 and Quake 3 and the first version of Unreal and some other things that like various other genres of video game engine that like are out there completely open source, and you can like open them up and look at how everything works. If you want a little bit more sort of like structured learning, I think there's a lot of online classes that like use modern game engines and break down very sort of like modern day game development into various stages that you can follow along with your own project open on your computer and kind of slowly build it up over time with a lot of like, uh, you know, online help. And there's a huge amount of community effort around those sorts of things as well. So it's easier to learn if that's the way you do it correctly. There's also stuff that like you can just pull down projects off of the Unity asset store that are already working and kind of like just go from there, right? Like take a platformer that's already built and slowly change it to be something else, like the modding sort of scenario, if that's the way you learn best, right? So there's a lot of different kind of alternate ways of learning this stuff if you don't want to like go the full plunge and try to go to a regular college or to a video game program. Um, it's one of the strengths of the video game industry as it currently is right now.
Oh yeah. So like what's your coding and desk setup like these days?
Wow. That's a very interesting question. I have a pretty eclectic scenario right now. Like my desk looks a little bit like, you know, Batman's control module, because like I have a big desktop because I still do some VR work. And so I have a beefy setup in case I want to like tether to the Quest and do some really heavy VR. And then I also have uh, um, a couple of laptops that I use to do lighter development work, as well as just like uh, um, have a bunch of like Teams video calls up if I need, because I work on a remote project right now, and so like I have team members in 4 other countries, and so I still have to do all of the remote craziness that the world is doing right now. But for the most part, like when it comes to development work, um, have had roughly the same setup that I have had for a long time, which is dual monitor as big as you can, so that you can have one up with like the thing you're working on, and one up with a big debug window, so that you can do all of the things you need to do in order to make uh, uh, the actual development of what you're doing as fast and as furious as possible.
Okay, sounds like a intense setup, a hardcore setup. So, which areas of coding do you see, as the best to get into? I know it's a question that I always get. I always have an answer. I have a specific answer that I give. Like, but what's your opinion on that? If somebody asks you right now, what area of the coding should I get into?
Usually, when people ask me that kind of thing, I tend to say like, what part of what part of the game when you're playing do you feel the most strongly about? If when people are playing a game, they don't really care what it is that they're playing. They're just sort of looking at the fidelity of the graphics, or they're looking at the effects, or they're looking at like the spectacle of it. Then it might be because they have that eye, right? And they really, really like want to improve that over time. They might be an artist, or they might be the kind of coder that wants to like optimize a graphics engine over and over and over again, to the point of where they can like make um, as many polys as possible. Or they might even be like a shader programmer type of coder that like wants to make those sorts of effects um, happen in real time in the game. And so, whereas like if they spend most of their time talking about how, you know what, the, this fighting game doesn't feel right. Like I swear, like when I push this button half the time, it doesn't feel like it's connecting. Like this character actually feels quite a bit better than this character. If you feel them kind of like going in that direction when they're talking about whatever game that they're playing, then I tend to say, you might be really, really interested in gameplay programming, because that that tends to go in the direction that you seem to be most focused on, as far as like, is the game fun or good or not, tend to be gameplay concerns, right? And on and on and on. I could sort of break down any given modern game into 12 different scenarios, and like say, are you the kind of person that like talks about the audio? Are you the kind of person that talks about the animation? And so I think it's always goes to me. It always comes back to like, what are the passions of the person that like is asking that question? Because video game development in general is such a passion industry that like, if you don't really feel something in your gut for the work you're doing, you're not going to do as anywhere near as good of a job as if it really gets you up in the morning to like make whatever it is that much better.
Oh yeah, for sure. You like my answer always is forget about the latest programming language. Forget about the latest framework, or AI is hot, for example. Think about like, what do you actually want to do? If you want to get into games, then you obviously have certain paths. If you want to get into web, you have certain paths. If you do want to get into AI, that's fine. But actually think, do you want to get into AI? Because I hear people like, you got to get into AI now because it's the hottest thing, and they talk as if JavaScript development is going to be dead in 5 years. Or C++ development will no longer be around in a decade because of AI. It's like, no, it's not really going to happen. Obviously, you could. I think will be better if you aren't already a coder, and I find most of the time it's usually people that aren't that well established in a career that ask these questions or they're starting out, is maybe do something a bit more mainstream like web development or something in gaming, and learn some of the other stuff at the side, especially on a deep theoretical level. So when your company decides to implement AI in a big way or VR in a big way, you just conceptually understand how AI and machine learning works, and maybe you've got some exposure to it on some personal projects, and that way you can show your manager, your employer that you've got the experience, and they're like, okay, great, you've got the experience. We want to use that experience, married with the experience of your general game development experience. That, I think that's a far better route to go than say, because I see people that will chase the next, new framework, the new language, AI or wherever it is, but then they won't develop a solid enough base and foundation in that particular area to do anything major in it, and they'll just constantly flip flop from one to the other. And it's like regular developers have not gone away in that period. They're making money just as they were before, and just as they will be going ahead as well.
No, for sure. I mean, one thing that's actually a super good kind of cool part about the whole AI push right now is that, like, let's say you have a game that you wrote in C++, you could take a chunk of that code right now, dump it into Chat GPT and say, hey, write this, translate this code for me into Python. And you could teach yourself Python with your own code in C++ by, like, exactly what that code does in C++. So you could say, hey, Chat GPT, please translate this for me to Python, and get a much better sort of like on ramp into a new programming language by using your own code as a prompt for ChatGPT. Now, obviously, you have to like watch out that ChatGPT doesn't like give you crappy code, but especially with code you already have that works, it's much easier for a large language model to sort of like port it over and get it right. You know what I mean? And the thing I would say is that if you're going to learn that new language, you probably have a Python compiler or whatever. And so you can kind of set up an environment, take that Python code, run it, see if it runs. And if it doesn't, try to figure out why not. And that's going to help teach you that language as well. And so AI is actually kind of opening the door for people to like learn some of these frameworks a little bit faster, because they can kind of like translate between them a little bit and be able to like magnify the skills that they already have in computer science to like other languages that maybe they don't know just quite yet.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I think that's definitely a fantastic use of some of these AI tools like ChatGPT. Talking about AI and ChatGPT, what do you think of them? What do you think their effects on the industry will be, and how do you see the next 10 years playing out, especially in the gaming space as well?
I mean, the interesting thing is, like, because I was an AI programmer for so many years, like a lot of the functionality of ChatGPT has actually been around for quite some time. It's just that like you basically needed to have an advanced degree in artificial intelligence and maybe like semantic modeling and some other things in order to kind of like get that kind of functionality to come out of a computer. You needed a couple of PhDs to sit down and crank it out. But like, it's been around for a while, and so seeing it pop out onto the mainstream, it's kind of like, how earlier we were saying spatial computing wasn't quite ready for consumers. Like, that's kind of what I'm saying, is like all of that tech has been around for 10 years or so. It's just that now it's consumer friendly, right? Like now I don't need to have a PhD and all that stuff in order to like write that stuff down and get that functionality to happen. I can just go to a website and say, hey, ChatGPT, do this. And so the ability of ChatGPT and large language models, that's not super surprising to me personally. However, I will say it's been surprising, like, just how fast things have moved since they first came out, right? Like it's been really awesome to see just how long it stayed in the open, kind of like community, and that like all new improvements were just immediately pushed right back out to the public, because that's super important, so that the functionality there can grow, but people can understand it, so they can know not only what it can do, but what it can't do, right? And when to trust it, and when to like make sure that you check your source, essentially. And so I think overall the technology is super powerful, and it's just going to become more and more powerful as we figure out the best ways to use it. But to your point, like there's always going to be people are always going to have concerns over AI. I've never completely understood why, simply because for whatever weird reason people go, wow, that thing can understand the sentence I typed into it pretty well. I hope it doesn't pick up a gun and shoot me in the face. Like they immediately go to Terminator 2, you know what I mean? And it's like calm down, you know what I mean? Like there's a big monster difference between this thing understands enough about language and about the context of the thing that you typed to be able to answer you based on its language model, all the way up till it has, some in sort of intuition that you're trying to harm it and that it needs to fight back. Like that's a very large delta between those two sort of cognitive stances, right? And so I I like the fact that it's been out there in the public, because it's allowed the public to make use of the tool set to a larger degree than it would have been if it had been sort of stuck in academia this whole time. And I'm hoping that like sort of openness will actually let it go a little bit past some of the like initial fear of like, it's going to kill us all, because I've seen that too many times, where like a technology is obviously it's too powerful and we don't know what it's going to do, and therefore we should shut it down. And that's just never really successfully been done, as far as I can tell. We have to like learn its cons and its pros, and how we responsibly use it. And we can't sort of like put the genie back in the bottle and just like hope everybody else does too. You know what I mean? We have to be real about like, this technology is here and it's here to stay, and we need to use it responsibly, not you know uh, sort of put a moratorium on it because we're not quote unquote ready for it. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't mean that I'm advocating reckless use of anything, like any other tool, right? Like in a sort of horrible side metaphor. The Oppenheimer movie is coming out right now, and it's always been fascinating to me, that particular story, because the scientists that were working on the nuclear bombs at the time, when they set off the first nuclear bomb, they were not sure if it was going to ignite the entire atmosphere or not, and they did it anyway. You know what I mean? Like that's mind-blowingly low ethics. And so like I get the scientific notion of saying like, we're not completely sure what all the ramifications are of some of the systems that we're doing, but like I think there's a difference between we're lighting a fire and we don't know if that fire is going to go out, versus we're going to make a large language model and we don't know if the resultant system will gain sentience and pick up a gun and shoot me in the face. You see the difference there? One is a pretty direct kind of like ethical quandary, and the other one is like a almost more of a like a just a fear at this point of rapid change.
Oh yeah, it's definitely one of those things that I think people either don't care about and they don't leverage in a very good way or a very useful way, or they overthink it too much. And I mean, it's always been the case, with technology, with the internet. I mean, I think the same with electricity when that was, becoming mainstream. that's just always the case. So I mean, that's just something you just have to ignore. The Luddites of the world, and just just continue using it, and obviously, like I said, just be responsible. So,
I mean,
like,
you can dig up newspaper articles from the 1800s that speak to the fact that the bicycle is going to ruin cities because nobody can go walking anymore because bicycles are going to come along and like smash into you. You know what I mean? And so, like, there's always like a fear of change, right? Of what people feel safe with because of the way that they used to do stuff. But I got to tell you, like, generative tools like you seeing right now are going to monstrously magnify the amount of really awesome stuff that like talented people can make, and it's also going to make so many new opportunities for interaction goodness that like didn't make any sort of monetary feasible sense before, right? Like here's an example. Grand Theft Auto 5. Grand Theft Auto 5. Do you want to know why you haven't seen Grand Theft Auto 6 come out? So Grand Theft Auto 5 cost approximately, I don't know, somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 million to make, and at one point there was like roughly 800 scripters making objects for that game, because every little thing that you pick up in that game you can pick up, you can throw it at a wall, you can light it on fire, you can set it, you know what I mean, like you can do all kinds of crazy stuff. It's crazy interactivity at a huge level, right? That game world is monstrous. So it took 1,000 people and $300 million, and like so they're not just like cranking those out over and over and over again, right? Because like that's an enormous amount of effort and money that may or may not pay off at the end. Um, Whereas once you start having generative tools that can like make a bunch of stuff based off of common sense kind of like rules, and kind of like magnify the efforts of each one of the developers that are involved in that experience, you're going to start seeing video games out there that are like generative, where I go down a particular path and I might start to see whole chunks of game world that are basically being generated on the fly for me while I'm there, based on what I'm doing, how I'm doing, what I like, other games I play, all kinds of stuff. Like those, that's a type of interactive product that like we've never been able to generate before, just simply because the financials behind making all of the assets in order to do something of that kind of style just wouldn't be possible without generative tools. And so I'm really I'm really excited about like where the video game world is going to go, the types of games we're going to be able to have with generative tools, the types of games we're going to be able to have with generative engines eventually. Um, that's all super fascinating, and it's not very far off. I got to tell you, I've already seen video games where all the assets were generated, by AI that they've been used. It's only a matter of time before you're going to start seeing games with resources that are being generated on the fly. That's coming.
Oh yeah, I mean that's definitely going to be a very powerful and exciting time, and I think you will get some products that may not be of the best, quality, and that we're used to. But once the AI models and like the companies know, the balance between how much AI to, incorporate and how much, sort of, regular development to incorporate. Once they get that balance right, yes, for sure. Because one of the biggest criticisms I have with games like GTA, with games like Uncharted or whatever, is I just want more of them. Yeah,
Yeah.
I want DLCs. Obviously, DLCs have kind of gone away and become more in-app purchases because they generally make more money. But I love that idea that Valve tried to do with the Half-Life 2 episodes, episode 1, 2, and obviously we never unfortunately got episode 3, but it's like a third of the cost of the game, roughly a third of the length of the game. Instead of you waiting 5 to 10 years, you wait 1, maybe 2 years, and you get a new mini game out of it. And obviously they had that with GTA 4 as well. They had the Ballad of Gay Tony, and I can't remember what the other one was called, but those two DLCs and good DLCs in their own right. But I think AI can help sort of solve some of that. Where yes, there may be certain things that are more primarily developed by regular developers, but then you might get AI, and it might be in collaboration, in conjunction with the actual developer, so it's officially endorsed or officially released, or it might be effectively like a mod, but it feels like an actual DLC that's come from, let's say, Rockstar for GTA and not a mod. Because mods, no matter how good they are, for the most part, they still have a very not original feel to them. And
A lot of those early mods were made in games where it really was designed to be able to mod that game, right? So you started with some game and you could add a level to it, or you could add a weapon to it, or you could add a whatever. But like um the first game that really kind of like pushed that, I think, was uh, uh Warcraft 3, right? The the mod community for Warcraft 3 spawned Dota and League of Legends, right? That was a genre of game that didn't exist until it was modified into Warcraft 3. And the StarCraft 2 game engine allowed people to make arcade games inside of it. There was platformers and shooting games and all kinds of crazy things that were made inside of the StarCraft 2 engine. Um, by the time that started to really get big, Unity and Unreal kind of became a thing, and so now you have general game engines that are easy to sort of start from scratch and make new stuff. You don't have to rely on mod engines from a particular game developer. So I think we're in a place where we already have a lot of games that have some procedural content and some non-procedural content, and so there's already been games like No Man's Sky, or even some of the Oblivion games, where a lot of the game world was sort of, it's almost like sort of randomly generated, but at the same time there's stuff in there, there's dungeons in there, there's adventures and encounters that have been specifically crafted by people. And so I think you're just going to start to see more and more and more of that, right? Where like I got of huge game worlds of stuff that can be generated by an AI, and then I can like specially hand tailor parts of it or chunks of it or some thread that goes along while you're generating all that other stuff, so that you can make these larger, more expansive worlds and not have to have huge teams of people.
oh yeah, like the potentials are, it's very exciting. So across all this, this vast career that you've had, what would you be your biggest regret in your journey,
Hmm.
and what advice would you give to someone looking to follow in your footsteps?
Hmm. I think biggest regret. I don't actually have a lot of regrets. I think that if I had to if I had to say something I regret, because like I wrote a few books years ago. Like I wrote an AI book in 2004 and second edition in 2008. I was an editor on a few books in the early 2000s. Um, I think if I have one regret, it would be that I wish I would have essentially forced myself to take the time to like maybe do some more writing. Um, it really focused a lot of my thinking, and it made me a lot better of a developer, and it made me a lot better uh, um, at like being able to like get my ideas across and get people to sort of like basically sign up to do whatever larger project we were working on, right? It made it easier for me to kind of like influence larger groups of people by doing that writing, because it forced you to put things in ways that like more and more people can understand, right? Like more accessible language and thinking things out more clearly. And so I would think that's maybe my only real regret, is that I didn't like essentially force myself to like pump out like five more books, because every time I did, even though it was hard, I got to say it really, really, I still see the value of every one of the things that I wrote over the years. Um, and then the second part of your question, what was it? I can't remember.
It was, what advice would you give to someone looking to follow in your footsteps?
For me, what I would say is if you're looking to follow in my footsteps, I would say that means that you probably are a gameplay and AI person. And what I would say then is really dig in on a lot of products, figure out why you like the way certain products feel, why they feel powerful and expressive and like immersive, and start to make stuff that like either gets at the root of how those guys are doing that or gals, but also like break down the games that you play, not in terms of, oh, this is a shooter and it's in this world. Think of it more like, how much is it asking of me from an input standpoint? How much is it asking of me to like focus on from an output standpoint? What do the feedback loops really, really look like? And like, how is this control scheme adding to the experience? And how much is it relying on people to already be, experienced with first person shooter mechanics in the past versus teaching them something new? Really getting deep into like that particular set of questions and really starting to look really strongly at the games that you really, really like or that you really, really want to like emulate, and start breaking down those experiences at a deep level, because most of my career has been that exact thing over and over and over again. All of my work at Magic Leap was about that. All of my work and late video game work was about that. Even all of the AI work that I did, a lot of the education that I ended up doing for AI and for game AI and deeper experiences was around, sort of human psychology. But all that really is like deeper understanding of like how the user is experiencing the game, how they're interfacing with the game, how do they really, really sort of do something with their hands or their eyes or their, you know what I mean? And like, it always ends up being that same task of like breaking down the feel from an input and an output standing, and like, how does that trigger emotions? How does that trigger, kind of like a feeling of creation or a feeling of being there and being immersed in an experience? And so I always give that advice out, like, spend some real time with whatever the games are that you currently love, trying to dig into what is it that you love about the interface, or what is it that you love about the way that it gives you information back in terms of feedback. Like, really dig into that and try and like see if you can pry underneath the curtain, if you will, of the fact that it's, Mario or whatever shooting game that you really, really like, or whatever.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's one of the advices I have for people as well. Is when you're playing these products, or maybe it's a website, maybe you want to be a web developer. Everyone uses websites. Try and break it down in your head. Try and, especially if you have some technical coding knowledge, try and think. They use this component, or they use this bit of coding. Just try and have an grasp of how it works. And so yeah, I think definitely that's a good way of going about things, especially in the meantime, whilst you're maybe learning, trying to get a job, whatever it is, in a transition. So that's all my more specific questions. I always end it with some more fun generic questions. And first one being, would you rather run a 10-person company or a 1,000-person company, and why?
I mean, definitely a ten person company. The smaller team, I got to say, like every time I've ever worked on a smaller team, it's been a better experience, and largely it's because it's easier for people to get safe with each other. It's easy.
Hmm.
It's easier to build trust when you have a small team, and once you have built trust, you can now have a safe space to where you can like basically tell each other whatever, right? So if something in the game doesn't feel exactly right, you talk about it right away. You say, hey, have you guys noticed this? It doesn't feel quite as good as it used to anymore. Whereas like if it's a 1,000-person company, something doesn't feel quite right. You maybe don't even know the people that are involved in doing that particular aspect of the game. You have to like go over and like make friends with them and figure out how to talk to them about it. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm sure there's large companies that have kind of like safe environments and they feel good about like free and open feedback. I'm just saying that in general, with human beings, it's a lot easier and faster to do that kind of stuff if you know the people and you trust them and they trust you. And so smaller teams tend to make really good stuff in my experience. And it's because of that trust, right? It's because they can tell each other all the problems as quickly as they can, and potentially fix them. And so larger teams tend to just make much more complex stuff better because they have the manpower to do much more complex things. But it doesn't tend to be as tightly kind of like tuned.
Oh yeah, for sure, and there's definitely merits to both. So, would you rather? I'll keep it in British pounds. The next question, because you're in the UK right now. And so, would you rather have £5 million up front or £500,000 a year for the rest of your life, and why?
I mean, I personally would do the 500,000 a year because then I don't have to like basically worry about living. I can kind of like focus on projects for the rest of my life at that point. Whereas if I have 5 million up front, I have to try and find a good way to get that to continue to give me income for the rest of my life, which in today's day and age, 5 million is not as much as it used to be, right? And so you can you can do a couple of like really safe projects with that, or you can like maybe do one that's not so safe and try and turn it around. But like um, that's a thing where you've got a limited timeline that you've got to like make sure you can do. Now, yes, I could move to a Fijian island and just drop off the grid and I'm all said and done. But like for me personally, like I would rather like keep doing projects, keep being out there and like so for me that means I need to stick around for a little longer and not just like disappear.
Oh yeah, for sure. So, what's your favorite board game, video game, and movie?
Oh, so that's really tough because like I have been in games for a really long time and I was also a professional movie reviewer back in the day, believe it or not.
Okay.
So um, I would say,
What magazine or website did you work for as a side question when you were
oh,
reviewing, or like newspaper? What was it?
believe it or not, it was the Denver newspaper, the Rocky Mountain News. When I went to university, I was also a movie reviewer at the Rocky Mountain News, and so yeah, for like 5 years, I professionally reviewed movies, and they paid me to do it, so it was great. um, uh, let's see, some of my favorite movies. I really like the first Matrix movie. I recently, I would say the recent Sony Spider-Man with Miles Morales was really excellent. Um, the art style was really good. The story was really good. The characters were really good. Um, there wasn't a lot of gaps in that movie. Um, I actually really enjoyed everything all at once that just recently came out. That movie was so completely random and crazy, um, and yet at the same time, like told a really cool story. And there's very few movies nowadays that like shock me. And so like that movie had at least 2 or 3 times where I was just like, I can't believe this is happening right now. And so that was really really good. As far as more classic movies that I really love, I really really love the first Ghostbusters movie. I got to see it in the movie theater. It to me was the height of like the American comedy. um, so that's movies. I'll stop talking about movies because I can talk about movies forever. Um, in the video game worlds, um, recently I've really really liked. I've been playing a lot of Switch games recently, and so like I really liked Hades, the roguelite kind of like action based game that like I have a bunch of replayability, but it's not playing the same exact thing over and over. It's a little bit procedural. I've really gotten into those, and so those have been pretty fun. I've always been a Zelda fan, all right from the very start, and so like I'm really waiting for Tears of the Kingdom, the new Breath of the Wild sequel to come out. That's actually been on my list for a while. And then also like I've been doing a lot of VR gaming over the years because like working at Magic Leap kind of got me into that space of kind of like immersive narrative and kind of like more naturalistic controls. And so like I've been spending a lot of time in various VR titles as well as like um, I do a lot of consulting still for VR companies because of all the Magic Leap work that I did. And so um, I've been playing a good chunk of VR games, everything from some of the archery titles that are out and like the adventure games sort of stuff that build on that to the Robo Recalls of the world or there's been some really interesting ones that have been coming out recently that are like a little bit less combat based but are more sort of adventure gamey, that are really good to see like people venturing into puzzle design, but in a more sort of spatialized room scale way. That's really fascinating to see and fun. And as far as sort of like uh, uh, you know other stuff, I would say I've been playing a lot with Lego lately because of the fact that I work here now. And um, board game wise, I'm a huge board game fan, and I kind of like am always continuously buying like two-ish board games a month or so. The last one that I bought was, believe it or not, it was called Fire in the Hole. It's a kind of like a weird party game where you play a pirate and you have to like throw cannonballs into a ship to try and like get four in a row kind of thing. So it's almost like a weird version of Connect Four in a board game fashion, except that you have to like you know hold your arm funny and throw little felt cannonballs. And so it's been a fun kind of like physical board game. The last kind of like hardcore board game that I played that was really good was oh god, sorry, I'm so bad with names. What is it called? Uh, ah, I lost it. I'm sorry. It's getting late for me. I'm starting to lose it. Um, I like a lot of social board games because as a game designer, I tend to like focus a little bit more on like how other people are interfacing with the game than I do with the game itself because my game design brain tends to break down whatever game I'm playing to to kind of like know how to like optimize thinking about it. And so I don't know that I play board games in the same way that a lot of people play board games, right? But I tend to focus on a lot of like off kind of like one-off mechanics. So like there was a game in the 80s called Fireball Island. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. It's a ginormous board game that had like a big 3D shaped map and you kind of moved your guy around and then you would like occasionally roll the wrong way and these marbles would come rolling down and like smash into you and force you to like start over again. And so they recently remade it. You can look it up, Fireball Island, and it's actually a really good game. It's a big game. It's a 3 or 4 person game that can take a couple of hours, and it takes up a huge table. But it's a lot of like little fun physical mechanics where you're moving pieces around, or you're rolling marbles, or you're doing little activities. And so like I really enjoy those types of board games as opposed to more like the heavy strategy board games that are resource management or those sorts of things. Because for me, I've done so much of that work in the video game industry that I don't need to kind of like do them in a non-screen based way. I still end up breaking them down in exactly the same manner and playing them. And so I'd rather just sit down with Civilization 4 and play that. You know what I mean? And
Fair
so,
enough.
yep.
So, what video game are you looking forward to? Big gamer, and like, what upcoming game or games? Same with movies. What upcoming movies are you looking forward to as well?
From a video game standpoint, like I said, I really am looking forward to the new Zelda coming out, and the other big one that I saw recently was there's a what's it called? Um, the new League of Legend, the League of Legend world game that just came up, the Mage Seeker. Have you seen this?
No, it doesn't ring a bell. The
Yeah,
Mage.
it's fairly new. Like I'm really enjoying some of the like modern games that are using like um, a little bit more retro graphics to sort of like focus the gameplay a little bit, focus on the gameplay a little bit harder instead of on ultra realistic graphics and stuff. And so I'm looking forward to that one coming out because like a the League of Legends team, I know a lot of those guys and gals, and they work really hard to kind of like make stuff that feels really good. And so I'm looking forward to that. And also, like I said, I do a lot of Switch gaming, and so that would be the first couple of games that I say are like top of my list right now. As far as movies are concerned, um, man, um, I don't know. I don't have a lot of like movies that I'm like super looking forward to, just simply because um, like the pandemic sort of knocked me out of my rotation where I was like going to like all movies all the time, and I haven't really gotten back into it. I did go to uh, the Mario movie with my kid just recently, and it was interesting because it wasn't a great movie, but it wasn't a bad movie by any stretch, right? It was a very entertaining. It felt like a very Nintendo movie, and so I did go to that, and he was looking forward to it. Um, but honestly, like the last movie that I went to that I was looking forward to was the everything everywhere all at once. And coming up, I don't know. I can't think of one off the top of my head that I'm looking forward to coming up next. Um, I'd have to go grab a website and take a look at it. Um, it's it's interesting. Like the more that I've done a lot of immersive play on VR and that kind of thing, I think the less I'm like really really going for a lot of movies. You know what I mean? Because like the the ability for narrative to be really really connective in VR is so much more powerful that it really has to be kind of like a spectacular movie for me to like really get into it now, right? Whereas like I definitely was much more immersed in a lot more movies back in the day. So, like I'm what I'm looking forward to is some like really high end adventure style non-com not completely combat based VR. I would really love that. I would really love if somebody would make me like Uncharted in VR.
Mm.
And like Alex was a pretty decent go. There was some really good interactions in that product, but like it's short, right? Like that's some expensive content right now, right? Like that took a lot of money and a lot of hours to really get right. And so like I understand why that content isn't out there just yet because it's tough, but it's coming. You know what I mean? And so I think I'm more looking forward to you know that kind of like a movie that I'm walking around in, if you will.
Okay. So yeah, that game that you was talking about, Mage Seeker. I had
Yeah,
a Google of that. The gameplay of it, the screenshots I'm seeing, looks similar to a game called Songbringer,
yeah,
and the upcoming Wraithbinder, which is by a guy called Nathaniel Weiss, and he actually was one of the first guests on the podcast. So yeah, it seems like a very similar game. I don't know if you've heard of Songbringer or not, it's definitely worth checking out. It's like made by a single person, and
nice.
he documented his journey on YouTube. He partly did live streams where he made the game and partly just talking about it. And he still documents the journey of doing the sort of sequel side game as well, Wraithbinder.
Nice. I will check it out.
Yeah, definitely worth checking out. So, final question.
Stormbringer, I've definitely actually played.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I might actually own this on Switch.
Yes, it is on Switch. I mean, it's come on a whole bunch of systems. I think initially was just PC only. He made it using the Cocos 2DX game engine and created his own wrapper.
Yeah.
And then he was ported, I think, with Double Fine Productions. They published it, I think,
Oh
if
yeah.
I'm
Double
correct.
fine.
Yeah, and they ported it over to like mobile iOS, Android. I think Android or maybe just iOS, Switch, PlayStation, Xbox. So yeah, it's definitely on pretty much any platform that you can think of.
I mean, it's kind of crazy how like if you get a good, super playable game, like how quickly you can ramp up. I mean, you know, Vampire Survivors won Game of the Year at the BAFTAs this year. That's awesome, right? Like it was so awesome to me to watch the BAFTAs and see, God of War and uh, Elden Ring and all of these hugely expensive games with huge teams and huge budgets. And the game of the year goes to Vampire Survivors. It's made by like four people. You know what I mean? Like
Mm.
what a testament to like the video game industry, like really, really seeing the value of awesome gameplay and kind of like really extendable game mechanics that can be played 1,000 different ways. That game is actually like a game designer game. Like the amount of different ways you can play Vampire Survivor and still have the gameplay feel somewhat balanced is fascinating.
Oh yeah, and I think video games are unique in the way that you can get an indie game that can have such a huge, large user base
Yeah,
and get downloaded loads of times, become mainstream and only be made by a few people. Whereas you get indie movies and like A24 and some of those other movies and they're good movies. Like, I enjoy watching some of those smaller indie, arty farty, if you want to call it, star movies. But never do I ever see one of them, and it's like, oh, it's made over 500 million or over a billion, or it's topping charts in terms of sales. Whereas you can get an indie game, especially on the mobile side, do something like that. That's made by one or a few people, and I think that's the crazy thing about video games is the barrier to entry and then the potential for where you can take it. Because I don't think there really exists a movie where a few people made it and all of a sudden it's like the top five grossing or it's like the top 10 movie of all time. It generally, or even for us, let's say for a year or a few months, it just doesn't exist. Whereas
yeah,
with video games, you get games that'll be in the top grossing mobile games, and it's made by one person or a few people, and or like top download. If you're not interested in the money metric, then like you can get that with games. You just don't get it with movies.
yeah. I mean, it's definitely not super common, but it can happen. And
Yeah.
like the great thing about it, I think, is that the scale of the economics is there. That if you make the right game, you can definitely like make a return.
Oh yeah, for sure. So finally, before we wrap up, does money buy you happiness? And on top of that, what does a good life mean to you? Because obviously, having a varied career, you've done a lot of things, worked on a lot of projects. I'm sure you've got a lot of insight into life and success and career. And you've met people like Steven Spielberg and probably other, big people, CEOs, directors, etc. Like, so like again, the first part, does money buy you happiness? Then the next part, does what does a good life mean to you?
So I would say, um, I don't know that for me personally, money doesn't buy happiness. I've never really chased after money. In fact, I would go so far as to say I've almost ran away from it because the video game industry is not usually it's kind of like the lottery. Yeah, you could win, but for the most part, you're just gonna like you're in the game industry because you really really enjoy games and you really really enjoy like experiences and getting people to like have fun with your products. And so if I could have probably left the game industry and gone and like programmed databases and made like 5 times as much money at any given point. So I was never really in it for the money, right? It was more about the work itself. And to me personally, like that is the way to have a good life, is to like really enjoy what it is that you do. I know that it's like not an easy thing to get, and I've been really blessed over the course of my life, and that I've always been able to kind of like get paid for stuff that I enjoy doing for the most part. um, but what I would say is that you really have to like look at yourself in the mirror and come to an understanding with yourself, like what is it that is going to motivate you, that's going to make you happy. Is it money? Because if it is, maybe double down on that and find a way to just make money. But if it's to make video games or it's to make apple pies, whatever it is, like I would just say try to really find out what it is that really does make you happy and just make that happen, because that to me is the best way to like not only enjoy yourself but to make better things. I've always found that if you enjoy what you're doing, you will always make better things. It doesn't matter how well you're paid if you don't enjoy doing it. You won't make as good a stuff as if you do enjoy it. So that to me is not only the secret to a good life, but it's the secret to good products.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like the synergy and the sort of the work ethic and the results that you get from a team or an individual that is engrossed in what they're making and what they're producing, you can definitely feel that love come through. And I totally agree. Figure out what it is that you want, and I think you need to get that balance of doing what you love, and let's say if that isn't necessarily just hardcore making money, and let's say it's making games, and having a good life, especially if you have people that depend on you, a wife or a husband, or kids, or other family members, or what, and obviously yourself, that you can provide for yourself as well. Because I've seen people, they'll have a career and they'll probably enjoy it enough, but then other people will suffer because they didn't think about this career is not earning as much money as they could do, and it builds some resentment within, let's say, the family, for example. So you've got to get that balance
Yeah,
of money, and then finding what you want to do and enjoy, and then just figuring that out.
for sure.
So yeah, I mean, that's all the questions I've got today, Brian. I want to thank you for coming onto the podcast. It was great, hearing about your time at, or your current time at Lego, because you're still there. You're working at Magic Leap, Blizzard, Sony, and all the various other companies that you worked on, the games that you've worked on, and all your advice as well. So again, thank you, Brian, for coming on to the podcast today.
Oh no, it was great. It's great to be here, and I appreciate that you took the time. Thank you.
No problem. So, thank you, everyone, for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode next week, and I'll see you in the next episode of FireDEV. Bye bye.
Bye.